BBC Two marks a love affair that's lasted 90 years.
For generations, one iconic steam locomotive has symbolised all that was great about British engineering: the Flying Scotsman. Designed by one of Britain's most gifted railway designers and built by a team of skilled workers, the Flying Scotsman was a perfect example of British craftsmanship at its best.
It's a very, very lithe, handsome machine. It looks like a mechanical racehorse, and that, of course, is what it was.
In an age when British engineering had so much to be proud of, the Flying Scotsman was a record breaker. The first steam engine to reach 100 miles an hour, the first to run non-stop between London and Edinburgh, and the first to star in its own feature film.
It's a magic locomotive. It's a bit like Apollo. It's a bit like Saturn V.
Such was the love affair with the Flying Scotsman that even after steam was replaced by more modern technologies, it defied all expectations and survived. It was rescued 3 times by 3 different millionaires.
The whole idea of buying an express passenger locomotive from British Railways was something completely new. Nobody had ever done it before.
This is the story of that remarkable adventure, from Flying Scotsman's first days in the spotlight to a last-minute escape from the breaker's yard. A 90-year journey that captured the hearts of a nation. It's spring 2004, and the nation's favourite steam engine is coming home to the National Railway Museum. Crowds of well-wishers have turned out to celebrate.
Yeah, when you got home you were black and covered in soot.
Yes, you were always...
and muck in your eyes.
And you could put your head out the window then, you see.
And that's what you're rocking
you can't do that now, but you could smell the steam and the smoke.
Can you smell that?
And go over the bridge and get your knickers all black with soot.
It took a massive public fundraising effort to save Flying Scotsman for the nation. More than 6,000 individual donations ranged from children's pocket money.
If we don't give our pocket money, it might get sold to another country.
To pensioners' postal orders and the deep pockets of Sir Richard Branson. They did it because the Flying Scotsman strikes a special chord with us. For lots of people, Flying Scotsman is a part of what makes them British. For many, it's simply part of the nation's DNA. And it's been like that from the beginning. After the ravages and upheaval of the Great War, Britain was beginning to get back to normal. People returned to work and began taking holidays once more. But travelling around the country wasn't easy. The road network was poor and cars were still an expensive luxury. Most people used the train.
Railways were booming after the First World War. Passenger traffic was extremely heavy, and the traffic, for example, that went from Edinburgh to King's Cross or King's Cross to Edinburgh up the East Coast Main Line was enormous and growing.
But the railways themselves were in a mess. Lack of investment during the war meant that most of the 120 different companies ran at a loss. In 1921, the government decided to reorganise them into just 4 groups. The Big Four set about showcasing the best of what they had.
The railways realised very early on in their history that they could make what might to some people seem quite an unattractive journey much more attractive by giving it an evocative name, and by the 1920s this had really reached a fine art. The Great Western Railway had its Cornish Riviera, the London and Midland Scottish had its Royal Scot, the Southern Railway had the Golden Arrow, but the most famous, the most evocative of all, was the London and North Eastern Railway's Flying Scotsman.
The London North East Railway began operating 6,500 miles of track on January the 1st, 1923. Its chief mechanical engineer was a young locomotive designer, Nigel Gresley. The son of a vicar, he was educated at the exclusive Marlborough College, and he began his career as a premium apprentice in the enormous engineering works in Crewe. Just 43 when he took over the reins at the LNER, he became responsible for almost 8,000 locomotives, ranging from small shunting engines to powerful expresses. However, the LNER board thought none were powerful enough to pull the increasingly long and heavy trains on the London to Edinburgh route. Gresley planned to solve the problem by designing a new class of super locomotive. They would be bigger and more powerful than any locomotive ever seen in Britain. And they would be built here at the LNER's main railway engineering works in Doncaster. In the 1920s, more than 4,500 people worked on this site. And Doncaster wasn't unusual. Britain was still a world leader in heavy engineering. Towns like Derby, Swindon and Crewe were dominated by massive railway engineering works. They all employed thousands of skilled men. Peter Tuffrey has spent years researching the world of the Doncaster plant works.
There would be lots of locomotives all lined up here, all waiting to go into the Crimswell repair shop for what was called heavy general repairs. They would come out and they would go into the paint shop here and they would be painted, lined, and they would look new and pristine and go out onto the main line to do their work.
Most of the original plant works have been demolished, but the erecting shop is still here. Used these days to repair engines. In the 1920s, it's where they assembled them. The LNER, like the other railway companies, was proud of its engineering tradition and employed a full-time photographer here.
What a great job it must have been, coming every day to photograph locomotives. Sort of job I would have liked that. You would always recognise the foreman because he would be generally a portly sort of guy with a bowler hat. And all the workers would be wearing flat caps and he would be watching you. And one thing that does shock me is how young some of the workers are. They would be 13 and 14 perhaps. That's quite alarming for us today, I think, considering the dangers that you would find in working conditions here.
This was where the Doncaster workforce would turn Gresley's designs for the biggest locomotive ever seen in Britain into the real thing. The workforce included every engineering skill imaginable. There were blacksmiths, fitters, boilermakers, and every component was made in the plant. The atmosphere would have been charged with heat, sweat, and noise.
It really was a hell up. The noise in the boiler shop and the Crimswell repair shop is fantastic, which is probably one reason why I'm deaf today.
When he began work as a premium apprentice in Doncaster, Peter Townend was just 16.
Everything came in as the sort of raw material for a locomotive, forged and cast. You got people heating up rivets and putting them through holes and bashing them.
It was out of this cauldron of heat and noise that the third of Nigel Gresley's new class of super locomotive emerged on the 7th of February 1923.
Reaction to it, strikingly, from the men is this is colossal. This is an enormous machine. And not only is it enormous, but for the first time, the driver's been thought of, and all the controls are easily to hand.
And behind the controls was an enormous firebox with a 42-inch square grate. The scale of the fire it produced made sure the engine could maintain steam pressure over long distances. But it wasn't just size that distinguished this new class of locomotive from what had gone before. The wheel arrangement was completely new. The most powerful locomotives in the LNER fleet had a wheel arrangement of 4 leading wheels, 4 main driving wheels, and 2 trailing wheels under the cab. This 4-4-2 wheel arrangement was known as an Atlantic class. Gresley put 2 extra driving wheels in his new engine and an extra concealed piston to drive them. It was called a Pacific class. By February 1923, the 3 new LNER Pacifics went to work pulling the heavy trains on the Flying Scotsman route between London and Edinburgh.
The third one of these huge Pacifics that they built doesn't have a name. It runs around the network and it does the normal work that they wanted to do. And then along comes this invitation from the British Empire exhibition to put on a big display in what is the biggest exhibition the world has ever seen.
The site of the exhibition in North London was massive. It included a new football stadium, a specially built train link to central London, and the world's first bus station. 56 countries of the empire were represented, and it was opened by King George V on the 23rd of April, 1924.
The British Empire exhibition was held 2 years running in 1924 and 1925. It was a great post-First World War celebration of Britain and its empire. It was a celebration of what the empire could make, including steam locomotives, of course, and over 2 years, millions and millions of people came through those exhibition halls at Wembley.
At its heart were 3 massive palaces dedicated to art, industry and engineering, and the British railway companies were invited to display the best of their work. LNER saw it as a perfect opportunity to promote their latest super Pacific class. Their newest Pacific locomotive was polished and wrapped up, but before they sent it off to Wembley, it needed a name. Tradition had it that locomotives were called after famous people, places, or royalty. But LNER again came up with something new. They named the engine after their famous flagship train service. They named the locomotive Flying Scotsman.
It goes to the Empire exhibition, and not only have you got this loco that looks colossal in British terms, but it's got the name on the side, Flying Scotsman. And really, a legend is born at that moment.
The exhibition had 27 million visitors over the course of its 2 years, and Flying Scotsman was the star of the show. The stroke of genius in its naming and the huge exposure it received at Wembley were the first steps on a journey to celebrity status. Flying Scotsman went back to the job of pulling trains from London to Edinburgh. But competition for rail passengers was intense, and the LNER was constantly searching for new ways to outdo its great rival, the London Midland Scottish Railway, which ran a daily service from London to Glasgow, the Royal Scot. In 1928, they came up with an idea that would take Flying Scotsman a step further to becoming a legend. It would star in an attempt on a world record.
Well, in Gresley's Pacifics, we have for the first time locomotives with the power and the stamina to run all the way non-stop from London to Edinburgh. And the marketing department quickly realised this and decided they wanted to make use of that capability.
It would be a